Jordan and in some not yet complete way with the Palestinian. It was due to the local political situation that there were not yet, till '94, diplomatic relations.
With the establishment of these formal relations, Israel appointed its first ambassador to the Vatican.
Being in the Vatican is like being in another planet for me as a diplomat. When I met the Pope for the first time, you know, I entered the Vatican through the main door with a Swiss guard, and the first Israeli who lived this experience. And I told the Pope that for me, really, it's a very, very great moment. And his response was, you know, this is an historical moment for all of us.
In 1995, to mark the 30th anniversary of the Nostra Aetate, the Israeli delegation, in the presence of Vatican officials, planted an olive tree from Israel in the Vatican gardens, echoing the words of the document.
Thus the Church draws sustenance from the root of that well-cultivated olive tree onto which have been grafted the wild shoots, the Gentiles.
Cultivating this relationship in the political turmoil of our time is one of the continuing challenges facing both sides of this diplomatic accord. Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel. When the siren sounds, the country comes to a halt. Though over half a century has passed since the Second World War, Israel, home to the largest number of Holocaust survivors and their families, commemorates this day every year with prayer and ceremonies. This is the official day to remember a terrible period in the history of mankind, a period in which 6 million Jewish human beings, men, women, and children, were persecuted, dehumanized, and murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators in Europe. The visit of Pope John Paul II to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, will be remembered as one of the most moving moments of his pilgrimage. His personal experiences, growing up in Poland before and during World War II, influenced the young seminarian who was later to become Pope John Paul II. It provided him with personal connections to the Jewish people and a strong feeling of identification with their suffering during the Shoah.
This is Edith Sira, born in Poland. During the war, she was sent to a labor camp where she remained until liberation. After the war, she was found by a young priest who carried her to the train station to join other survivors. This priest later became the Pope, John Paul II.
While the Holocaust has understandably been a watershed in the Jewish experience, members of the Church, too, are grappling with its meaning today.
What I mean by the Holocaust, the Shoah, as part of our history, is that sometimes you'll hear Christians say, well, that's Jewish history, as if the victims are the only part of what makes it history, but the perpetrators and the bystanders are overwhelmingly baptized Christians. Whether they're practicing or not, they're baptized Christians, and therefore it's our history. And we have to account in our own history of why this happened in a Christian country, and that's why it's our history.
In March of 1998, the Vatican's Commission on Religious Relations with the Jews published a document entitled We Remember, a reflection on the Shoah. Inspired by Pope John Paul II and the product of years of deliberation within the Vatican, the document directs Catholics to contemplate the actions of Christians in Europe during the terrible years of the Holocaust.
At the end of the millennium, the Catholic Church desires to express her deep sorrow for the failures of her sons and daughters in every age.
Although some Jewish organizations felt that the document was not far-reaching enough, there was no denying that the Catholic Church had begun seriously to examine its role in the Shoah.
The feeling was that the Shoah would not have happened had not the church taken that very strong stand against Jews down through the centuries and created what we called anti-Judaism, a form of anti-Semitism, by which we consider the Jews to have been responsible for the death of our Lord on the cross, whether they were Jews at that time or since.
I think the main message that needs to be communicated to Catholic students at all levels, but particularly those in theological schools, is in fact, in the first instance, that the Church failed to a certain extent, maybe to a great extent, morally during this period, that some of this moral failure was due directly to the historic teachings of the Church, which regarded Jews and Judaism in a very negative light.
In the Catholic schools of the Diocese of Paterson, New Jersey, 8th grade students tackle the issues of the Church and its relationship to the Holocaust in a structured curriculum taught throughout the diocese.
Christians blamed the Jewish people for being a God killer, correct? All right, and through the centuries, what were some of the ways in which Christians treated Jews? Larissa?
They'd separate them into different parts of where they live, just like they did in the ghettos.
The Catholic history, we have to learn about what we did, and we have to know that, like, we shouldn't do it again.
So in the future, when we grow up, we won't treat the Jews like that, or we won't treat anyone else like that.
It is a tragedy the Church needs to remember on account of her members' part in it, and especially in view of the close relationship between Christianity and Judaism. Failure to remember can lead to a minimizing of the Shoah and even a denial that the tragedy ever took place. Are there people that deny? Yeah.
In Toronto, Canada, 8th graders at a Jewish day school are also learning about the Holocaust. The issue of the righteous Gentiles, those non-Jews who tried to rescue Jewish victims, is part of their curriculum.
When Stern was being sent off in the train, and Schindler went after him.
What is the name, the term given to a person like Oskar Schindler who helped the Jews?
Righteous Gentiles?
Correct. Righteous Gentiles. Were there many?
No.
That's true. Comparatively speaking, in terms of, as Jews, when we think about the Holocaust and the loss that Jews suffered, you're right, there were not enough righteous Gentiles.
One of the major moral dilemmas confronting those who study the Holocaust is the issue of why so few people stretched out their hands to save Jewish lives at a time of such darkness.
When I passed the trees of the righteous here at Yad Vashem, I thought of how much these people contributed, how difficult it must have been, and how grateful I am that they provided some measure of hope, some measure of moral courage in an era of great moral darkness. They give me some hope. I wonder as well what I would have done and whether I would have had the courage that they showed, because it was so easy to find reasons not to show courage.
10 years ago, we created a Garden of the Righteous here at the synagogue. And every year we bring a non-Jew from Europe or from other parts of the United States representing a different part of Europe to honor and to be recognized by the congregation, because I want the children to know that there are good non-Jews in the world who did very righteous things and daring things on behalf of Jews, people who, often whom they did not know. And these are exemplars for us, and we must learn to live by that same standard.
Pope John Paul II's papacy has been noted for its symbolic gestures of reconciliation with the Jewish people, including the We Remember document and his historic trips to Auschwitz, Babi Yar, and Yad Vashem. In contrast, the papacy of Pius XII, the wartime pope, is a point of contention between the Jewish community and the Catholic Church.
I'm prepared to say that Pius did not make saving Jewish life a priority, and I'm prepared to critique him morally for that failure. I'm not quite prepared on the available data to